Had someone not watched a single football game throughout all of the 2020 season, they might look at Jerry Jeudy's stat line and gather that he had a successful season. In fact, by most conventional standards, Jeudy did have a successful rookie campaign. 52 catches for 856 yards is nothing to scoff at for a first-year player, especially considering the circumstances Jeudy was in, what with the terrible quarterback play and having no training camp or preseason thanks to COVID-19. Yet, Jeudy's 856 yards in 2020 were the 10th most ever for a wide receiver aged 21 years or younger. And he turned 21 the day after he was drafted, so he was a young 21. However, if you peruse social media at all, you'll find that a large selection of football fans not only think Jeudy disappointed in his rookie year, but that he's also doomed to be a bust because of it. It's not shocking to see a lot of general football fans overreact to a player perhaps not meeting their lofty expectations. However, it is kind of surprising to see just how many Broncos fans are ready to give up on Jeudy after one season. Of course, I don't mean to paint the entire fandom with one brush, as most seem to have their heads on straight, but the sheer number of people who have zero faith in Jeudy's career from here on out is still too high. I'm here to tell you that even if Jeudy's rookie season was a disappointment in a vacuum, it still only served to further my belief in him as a prospect. Jerry Jeudy is primed for a breakout season in 2021. But to move forward, we first must look back. Why did many see Jeudy's rookie season as a disappointment? The argument, whether you believe in it or not, is really quite straightforward. Jeudy simply had a severe case of the drops. He dropped 12 passes in 16 games, which was the second highest total in the league. His standout performance, if you want to call it that, came in week 16 when he dropped a whopping 5 passes. His drop rate on accurate passes of 18.8% was the third highest in the NFL, right behind teammate KJ Hamler. That's really it. Jeudy dropped a ton of passes and his obituary was written. There are a couple important things to keep in mind when discussing drops, however. Yes, drops really stand out and stick in your mind when watching a player, especially blatant ones. However, when you actually think about it, they really account for just a minuscule amount of a player's plays. Jeudy's 12 drops accounted for just 10.6% of his targets and 2.3% of his routes run. Yes, they can be frustrating and big ones can be absolute killers, but in the grand scheme of things, they don't matter overly too much. As the great Adam Harstad says, it's overemphasizing what we see and ignoring what we don't. Most players who struggle with drops, like Jeudy, are good enough in all the other areas of their game to where it simply doesn't even matter. Secondly, drops are historically one of the most unstable metrics to judge receivers by year to year. Most players who struggle with drops don't do so at a high level consistently. Take another former Alabama receiver for example. Amari Cooper dropped a whopping 18 passes in his rookie season of 2015. His 20.0% drop rate that season is the second highest mark of the past 10 years. And yet, he immediately followed it up with just 4 drops the following year on his way to an 1,100-yard Pro Bowl season. Similarly, another former Alabama first-round receiver in Calvin Ridley struggled with drops early in his career, with an 11.1% drop rate in his rookie season. Because he was already an elite separator like Cooper was, when his drop rate regressed to the mean, Ridley was ready to explode. And look at Courtland Sutton, Jeudy's current teammate in Denver. His 17.6% drop rate as rookie was second in the NFL, but he improved that mark to just 4.0% in 2019, when he had a Pro Bowl season catching passes from Joe Flacco. Look at Davante Adams, perhaps the league's best receiver. He, like Cooper, dropped double-digit passes in 2015, and he dropped 24 passes over his first 3 seasons. However, he's now one of the most sure-handed receivers in the league, mishandling just one of his 146 targets in 2020. However, fixing his drop issues isn't the main reason for Adams' historic turnaround. As I said before, drops tend to regress to the mean regardless, and they're a small piece of the puzzle. They only really matter when the receiver in question has nothing to bring to the table, a la Darius Hayward-Bay or Greg Little. Adams improved his game first and foremost because he became an elite route runner, not because he cut his drops down. Fortunately for Jerry Jeudy, he's already got that part of his game down. Even if Jeudy does not do a single thing to improve his game in 2021, which, call me crazy, but that seems unlikely, he is still more than likely to have a breakout season, thanks solely to statistical regression, because the talent is already evident. Jeudy entered the NFL already as one of the league's most polished route runners. He has an innate skill to just get open, which is the most important part of the job of a wide receiver, contrary to popular belief. It's also the most sustainable and predictive trait a receiver can have. As expected, Jeudy made defenders covering him look silly all season long, just as he did in college. His hesitation at the line of scrimmage is brilliant, as he lures defenders in with his surreal footwork before making a sharp cut to open field. Part of what makes his releases special is how expertly he employs a good head fake as well, as shown here. Like, look how badly he burns Panthers corner Azul Douglas here just because he sold it with his eyes so well. It simply doesn't matter if you drop a lot of passes if you can get this open this consistently. The drops will get cleaned up and it will all even out. Like, how often do you see a receiver get a completely free, untouched release off of press coverage? And of course, Jeudy pulled off perhaps the coldest move of the season when he roasted fellow rookie AJ Terrell by throwing up his hand to signal a go route a la Randy Moss, before swiftly cutting back inside for a curl, leaving Terrell stumbling and giving Jeudy an easy walk-in score. Jeudy's simply a phenomenal route runner, and he's only seemingly adding to his repertoire. But back to the drops. Another reason that they are not a huge cause for concern is that they weren't the primary factor for Jeudy's lackluster stat line in 2020. Jeudy may have dropped 12 passes, but he also led the league by receiving a whopping 35 uncatchable targets per Sports Info Solutions. Pro Football Focus was even more harsh on Broncos passers, as they calculated Jeudy's uncatchable pass rate to be 41%. Jeudy also racked up the most targets on which he created separation that resulted in an incompletion that was the quarterback's fault per PFF. If you wondered why Jeudy's box score stats look so nondescript compared to those of other standout rookies, there's a reason. Justin Jefferson was awesome in 2020, but if you swapped Kirk Cousins for Drew Lock, would the results be the same? It's something to think about. Lock ranked 31st out of 32 eligible quarterbacks in terms of uncatchable pass rates per PFF in 2020, ahead of only Carson Wentz. Lock was also dead last in completion percentage over expectation, as he was a full 2 points worse than Wentz per RBSDM.com. Lock also had the worst adjusted completion percentage, which accounts for drops, in the NFL last year. Lock was also only ahead of Mitchell Trubisky, Sam Darnold, Nick Mullins, and Dwayne Haskins in overall PFF grading. I'm sure you get the picture. Drew Lock was bad last season. Like, really bad. And his replacements of Jeff Driscoll, Brett Rippon, and poor Kendall Hinton were even worse in the 3 games that he missed. No receiver could have truly succeeded in that situation. And sure, Jeudy saw a larger share of the targets after Sutton went down in week 2, but I'd argue that Sutton's absence actually hurt Jeudy's development rather than help it. Jeudy was forced to step up immediately as the team's #1 receiver, with undrafted third-year man Tim Patrick as the next man up. Patrick played reasonably well for what it's worth, but behind those two, Denver had bare bones at the position. Having Sutton on the field to draw some bracket coverage opposite Jeudy would have opened up more room for Jeudy to make plays. See Adam Thielen for Justin Jefferson and Amari Cooper for CeeDee Lamb. Whereas drops is one of the least predictive stats for receiver play, air yards is one of the most predictive, as it shows how often a receiver gets open and how often his quarterback trusts him to make a play. Air yards represent the number of potential receiving yards a player could have gained if they caught 100% of the passes directed at them and immediately fell down. Like drops, yards gained after the catch is also a pretty volatile stat, so it makes sense to predict based on the yards from the route alone. This is where Jeudy truly shined as a rookie, and why it makes sense to buy him in fantasy going forward if you're into that sort of thing. Jeudy saw the 6th most air yards in the entire NFL in 2020, behind only Calvin Ridley, DK Metcalf, Stephon Diggs, Tyreek Hill, and DJ Moore. He was third to only Ridley and Metcalf on that list in terms of air yards per target. A whopping 965 of Jeudy's 1536 air yards were unrealized, meaning that that's the amount that was left on the field either via drops or off-target passes. As you can see by looking at the other leaders in the stat, it's a pretty good measure of play. Among the top 10 players in air yards in 2020, Jeudy and Chase Claypool were the only two who didn't reach 1,000 yards on the season. Like Jeudy, Claypool also had a quarterback who struggled with accuracy problems throughout the season. Jeudy has already shown that when he gets the ball, he's electric, as he was 7th in the NFL in yards per reception at 16.5 in his rookie campaign. It's just a matter of actually getting him the ball. I simply see zero reason to believe that Jerry Jeudy won't break out sooner rather than later. Even while playing through his rookie season at the ripe age of 21 with no training camp or preseason, and while catching passes from one of the least accurate quarterbacks in the league and his backups, one of which was a practice squad wide receiver, and while playing as one of the sole threats on offense thanks to his partner in crime's early injury, Jerry Jeudy still put up a solid freshman year in 2020, even despite struggling with an inordinate number of drops. The fact that he had 852 receiving yards in a season was largely deemed a disappointment speaks volumes about his skill level. Just this time last year, Jeudy was almost the consensus #1 wide receiver in a receiver-rich draft, and now he's been almost completely forgotten about, thanks to strong rookie campaigns from guys like Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and Brandon Ayuk. We've become numb to great rookie receiver seasons in recent years, to the point that anything less than spectacular from a top pick seems like the end of the world. Jeudy will be fine. His drops will regress as they always do, and his quarterback play literally can't get much worse. Even if Jeudy is stuck with Locke for another year, he is still bound for a statistical progression thanks to just how excessively unlucky he was in 2020 with drops and off-target passes. I can almost guarantee you that Jeudy won't see 63% of his air yards go unrealized again next season. That's just a ludicrous number. Even with Jeudy's struggles, we still saw the same elite route running chops that made him such a highly touted prospect coming out of Alabama just a year ago. How great Jeudy's 2021 production will be is dependent on whether Locke, Deshaun Watson, or some other rookie will be throwing the passes. But Jeudy's route running prowess will always be there, making the job easier for a signal caller. Jerry Jeudy has all the talent in the world to be one of the league's top flight receivers for years to come, and it's not a matter of if he breaks out, but when. I'd wager that time is now.